Hello, and welcome to the Tech Data Cyber Range Cyber Essential Series. This is Course 1, Getting to Know Kali Linux. Before we begin, I just wanted to do kind of a high-level overview of what to expect from the entire course series. Throughout the next few weeks, we're going to be covering topics such as Kali Linux and also other Linux fundamentals. We're going to be touching on basic networking fundamentals, learning fundamentals of the internet and how it works. We're going to be talking about different hacking tools and techniques. We at the Cyber Range feel it's important that even if you're a blue teamer or one of the good guys, it's very important to know how the bad guys are doing what they're doing, the techniques and tools that they're using in order to breach networks so that you can become a better security professional. And at the end of all this, our goal is to get you to the point where you can confidently engage in the cyber range, attacking the targets that we have, participating in CTFs, and various other activities we have planned down the road. And this course also is targeted for the absolute beginner that has never used Linux before. So, if a lot of these terms that I've already used are foreign and unfamiliar, don't worry. We're going to take you through everything you need to know and get you to where you need to be. So with that, we will move on to the next slide. So this week's course is going to be an introduction to the Kali Linux operating system and some of the basic uses of the system. So Kali is Linux based. So a lot of the commands that we're going to use inside of Kali are basically going to translate to any flavor of Linux that you use in the future. The reason we choose Kali is because it comes pre-installed with hundreds, if not thousands, of quote-unquote hacking tools. It also has digital forensics tools. It has even blue team tools such as Wireshark that you can use doing network forensics, or figuring out what happened in the event of a breach or a network attack. And then we're going to familiarize you guys with the operating system so that in next week's class, when we actually go through installing Kali Linux on your own machine, you'll already be a little bit comfortable with how to use it and know whether or not it's working properly. A little more details about what we're going to cover today. We're going to briefly review the Kali operating system itself, and then the rest of the tutorial is mostly going to be focused on the terminal. The terminal is essentially the Linux command line. It's very important to get comfortable and familiar with the command line in Linux. Whereas if you're used to using Windows in your career, you're likely used to having what are called GUIs or graphical user interfaces for all of your tools. Whereas in Linux, that's usually not the case. Most tools, especially in Kali, are command line based, so you have to physically type in the commands. So the commands that we're going to be learning today is basic navigation of the operating system and basic commands to kind of figure out more about your host itself. And we'll touch on all of these commands in just a second. And then finally, we are going to talk about the basic file structure of Kali Linux and Linux in general, so that you guys basically know where to find stuff. So Kali is what we call a Debian-based Linux distribution that is basically aimed at advanced penetration testing and security auditing. What is Debian? For those of you that may be familiar with Ubuntu Linux, that's generally the most common flavor of Linux. Ubuntu is a Debian-based Linux distribution. So Kali, like we said before, contains several hundred tools which are geared towards various information security tasks such as penetration testing, security research, computer forensics, and reverse engineering. And Kali Linux is developed, funded, and maintained by Offensive Security, which is an information security training company. Okay, moving on to the terminal. So for the Windows users in this class, it is kind of similar to either the Windows DOS or command prompt. So if you've ever kind of gotten down into the weeds with that, some of this might be familiar. It's a command line interface, and like I mentioned before, most Linux tools do not have a GUI, so it is very important to become familiar with the Linux terminal. Uh, if for whatever reason you can't find the icon shortcut to access it, simply doing Control-Alt-T on your keyboard will open up a new terminal for you. And the basic commands that we're going to discuss today is mkdir, cd, pwd, df, ifconfig, ping, and traceroute. And don't worry, these will all make much more sense in just a minute. So mkdir, short for make directory. It's one of the more simpler commands. It just basically allows the user to create a new directory, also known as folder, from the current directory path that they are in. So for example, you would just simply type mkdir space my directory. You can name it whatever you want. As soon as you execute that command, a directory called my directory will now be created from the path that you executed the command in. CD, this one for all the Windows users should be familiar. CD is short for change directory. It allows you to move up or down a directory tree. So for example, if I was in my home directory and I did CD documents, that would change me to the documents folder, assuming that that folder was below the directory I'm currently in, which if I'm in my home folder, it would be. CD ... will change you to the directory level above where you currently are, and the CD ... changes you to the highest level directory in that tree. So PWD, this is an important one. So this basically tells you where am I. So when you type it, it's short for print working directory. It tells you the exact path that you were in. So for example, /home/username. So slash just by itself is actually known as the root directory in Linux, and it's at the top of the directory tree. /home is the typical user directory for all the users on the system, and then /username is your specific user. So in my case, be /home/John, for example. Okay, users are typically placed into their home directory when you launch a new terminal window, and then when you exit a terminal, it does not remember where you were. So if you're in some long and complicated directory path and you happen to close the window and reopen it, you're going to have to navigate back to where you were, because it will by default set you back in the home directory. So this one's a little bit different now. We're moving on beyond moving back and forth between directory folders. There's a very useful command called df. df helps you figure out how much disk space you still have on the system. This is especially important when dealing with virtual machines, which we'll get into next week. But with virtual machines, you're typically going to have much more limited disk space than you would have just on your laptop or desktop as a whole. So the df command is going to list out all the hard drives and partitions and tell you how much is used and how much you have left. In the screenshot below, you see we type df-h. The -h is what's known as a switch, and this tells it to display the output in a human readable format. So in gigabytes and megabytes instead of just raw bytes, which is much harder to interpret. And as we can see here in our main directory, in this instance, we have 62 gigabytes of free space. So next we have ifconfig or ifconfig. I know people pronounce it different ways, and IPA. Both of these are useful commands to help figure out your networking configuration or your network status. Both of these commands, they'll tell you what your system network configuration is, such as the IP address that you have currently assigned, what your subnet mask is, and also your network adapter's MAC address. Don't worry if some of this sounds foreign still. We will cover this in some of the networking fundamentals. But just as an example, in this case, we can see right here on our Ethernet interface, this is the IP that we have assigned. and then also the MAC address right here for that interface, which can definitely come in handy if you're trying to troubleshoot any type of network connectivity issues. Moving on, next command is ping. This is a very important one that will help you also in network troubleshooting, as well as even reconnaissance, penetration tests, network troubleshooting, all sorts of things. Ping basically is a tool to see if an IP address is up and responding. Think of it like sonar for networks. So ping and pong, right? You send out a ping, the pong response, and then you can see the time that it took to get back to you. In this case, we pinged 8.8.8.8, which is Google's main DNS server. You know, if you want to try it out at home, typically if you ping 192.168.1.1, that will be the gateway on your home network. Just one thing to keep in mind, this is a little more advanced, but it's not 100% reliable because sometimes this can be spoofed or suppressed. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But generally speaking, this is a good way to see if a host is up or not. Kind of a extension of ping is what's called traceroute. So this basically defines the path or the networking path to your target IP. So it shows you all the hops between you and your destination. So in this case, from this server, we ran a traceroute to google.com, and you can see all the different nodes that it had to hit before it reached its final destination. It tells you how long it took to go to each hop. This can also be a very useful tool with network troubleshooting to see, you know, if there's a firewall between you and your destination. You know, is the firewall denying your traffic? Can be used in other forms of reconnaissance if you're on the red team. Very, very handy tool for network troubleshooting. Okay, so that covers all the commands that we were going to review today. Moving on now, we're going to talk a little bit about the basic Linux file structure. This slide definitely does not show all of them, but these are kind of the more major ones that you should definitely be familiar with in the beginning of your journey here. So the Linux is a hierarchical file structure. So at the very top of that hierarchy is the slash folder or root. And then everything else within the Linux file structure falls beneath that. The slash home location is where you're going to find all the users' operational directories. Slash bin is where all of the binaries for the operating system are going to reside. Slash etc is where the configuration directory files are located. So if you make any changes to like your host file or your interfaces file for your networking, if you want to play around with any of that, that's where you'll find those files. Slash var slash log kind of speaks for itself, but it's where all the log files for the operating system and its applications are located. This is very useful kind of on the blue team side of thing. Looking at logs is generally the way that you're going to figure out what's going on in an attack. And then slash temp also kind of speaks for itself. It's where the temporary files are stored. And then finally, this is kind of it's like a graphical overview of the file structure. Like I said before, it's a hierarchical structure. You got root at the top, and then all of these major folders underneath it, and then within those folders can be more folders, etc. You know, this can be overwhelming at first. You know, don't worry about it. We're going to cover a lot of this in the coming weeks. Just be aware of the overall structure, and then those core folders that I mentioned in the previous slide. And that's all for this week. It may or may not have felt like a lot. If it seems like a lot to take in, like I said, don't worry. You know, we're gonna go into a lot of these in more detail. And then if it was a little too basic for you, also don't worry, because we're gonna do a lot more fun things in the coming weeks. We just wanted to get everybody on the same page regarding how to navigate through the operating system, so that when we go and install Kali Linux in next month's course, you guys will be a little more familiar with how to navigate everything. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you guys next time.